Good morning. Welcome everybody to our January 19th edition of our PBIS Leaders Network. We're happy to see you guys after the holidays. It's good to see everybody fresh and starting in the new year. We'll go ahead and get started. Again, the session is being recorded, so just be aware that we are recording it and it will be available after today, after we have our meeting today, hopefully by the end of the week. Okay. And Stacy, I'm going to go ahead and throw it right over to you.
Thanks, Heidi. So we do have the bit.ly there on the slide, and also it's dropped in the chat, so you can go ahead and follow along if you'd like. So we're going to start today by watching a short video on the power of relationships in schools. And as we watch this, I would just encourage you to think about your reaction. What stands out to you, and how do you see a connection from power of relationships to classroom practices that we've been focused on in the network this year?
You had so much to offer yesterday. You okay?
I'm tired.
So what's going on?
Strong relationships are central to the learning process. What the science of learning and development tells us is that we need to create learning environments which allow for strong long-term relationships for children to become attached to school and to the adults and other children in it.
When children have experiences of closeness and consistency and trust, oxytocin is released. Oxytocin has many, many positive effects on the development of the brain. So when we think about a relationship, we're not just talking about being nice to a child. We're talking about a child having an experience of attunement and trust strong enough to release the hormone oxytocin.
Good morning, Ariella. How you doing today?
The purpose of the morning greeting is to connect with them and to just make sure that I'm seeing them as humans. Like, I'm making that relationship with them, making that bond.
I prioritize relationship building because getting to know them is the best part of the job.
When I come in the morning, we usually talk about things that are happening in our community.
We're trying to build caring and respect.
The teacher is trying to understand who I am and my values as a person.
When I have a free 45 minutes or an hour, I think to myself, I could sit down and catch up on grading, or I could go and make connections, whether it's a smile or a joke or a reminder. It validates their presence in the building.
Rock it out in the art room. It starts from so much honesty and transparency with kids. It's really easy to strive to be this like idealized, always ready to go elementary school teacher, and that's not real and that's not human. When people start talking about other things while I'm still giving directions, it feels frustrating for me and I have to take a breath. My students connect most with me when they see that I also struggle and I also have challenges. It takes a lot of vulnerability on my part.
Total familiarity.
When that student knows that you care about them, when they know that you're a human,
Let's think about that.
their academic performance in your class is going to be better.
If I'm comfortable around them, then I'm more confident around them, and it's easier to ask questions and things like that.
So when you're looking at this graph, what is it that you think happened?
Some teachers I don't always get along with the best, so then sometimes I'm like, I can't do it, so I'm just not gonna do it. But when I like the teacher, I want to do their work. I'll be like, I can learn this.
You all have done outstanding work.
Emotion and learning are completely connected. If you're in a positive emotional space, if you feel good about yourself, your teacher, that actually opens up the opportunity for more learning.
Good to see.
So as you watch that short video clip on relationships, I would love for a few people just to unmute and share what stood out to you, what resonated as you just watched those few clips that they shared throughout that video.
I'll speak. I think, validating the students' feelings, but also identifying, like, I noticed you did really well. You did really well yesterday. What's going on today? So you're validating that you know them and something's different, and you want to support them.
Thanks, Sherry. That's a great point, because it's not just, oh, good job, but you actually see something. You're seeing them day to day and how that changes or stays the same and how that impacts them. Anyone else have something to share? I know I've watched this a couple of times and several things stand out to me, but the one that stood out to me the most again today is when the young man says, when I like the teacher, I'll do the work.
Yeah.
And I think, how impactful is that? That ability to build relationships with kids, it goes so much deeper than just, what's the environment, how does it feel, but that impacts academics as well. And so again, just another connection between the importance of relationships, how they impact your classroom practices, and then how they impact even academics. So we just wanted to share that, just a little encouragement for the morning before we move into the rest of our meeting today.
Thanks, Stacy. And I would say that's probably true for adults. They probably don't work for a boss or a leader that they don't like either. I think it's probably true for adults too.
Right. So
go
today,
ahead. I know you're doing the agenda. Go ahead.
Yep. So today for our agenda, you can see that we're going to look at classroom practices from looking at that tier 2 networking idea as well. We have a local presentation today from Cloverleaf Middle School. They're going to share what their tier 2 practices look like. And I know we always get great responses from all of you when people in our region share, because it's actual practice happening. And then at the end, we'll share some updates regarding the PBIS National Conference and also 22-23 recognition. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Heidi.
Okay, so those of you, I know there's some new folks on with us this morning, but for those of you that have been attending, you know that our focus this year is really the classroom practices portion of the PBIS framework. We know that the experts say if PBIS isn't happening in the classroom, you really cannot say that you are implementing tier 1 with fidelity. So we thought we would spend the year talking about it. And we have talked about a couple things in several of our meetings so far. So let's take a look at what we've already kind of talked about. And that is, I believe we've covered all 4 of these first of the 8 classroom practices. Expectations and roles, how teachers set up their classrooms at the beginning of the year, and then how they really practice those routines and procedures as the year goes on. We've talked about what does encouraging expected behavior look like in a classroom, and then we talked about what does discouraging unexpected behavior look like in the classroom. So out of all of the 8, we've covered those 4 so far. There are direct links to teacher tools. If you have use the bit.ly to get the slides. If you click on any of these, you'll see direct links to teacher tools to help us. Teachers can use them to assess if they're doing these practices in their classroom. And for all 8, we do have those linked. But for today, we're going to talk about 2 on this screen. One is going to be opportunities to respond. And the other one that we're going to talk about is adjusting task difficulty. The last one there next to the red, the orange dot. The reason why we're doing those 2 is because from the last meeting, folks who took our survey identified these are the next 2 that they wanted to talk about. So also with this slide, you will have access to those teacher tools that you can use within your schools, within your teams, your PBIS teams, and individual teachers can use them to self-assess where they are with these practices. So we talk about practices also for school age, but and again with early childhood, similar practices, Michelle, but not maybe exactly, worded the same way, right?
Yeah, you're right, Heidi. So the teacher tools that we're going to look at today, the strategies hold true, no matter if you're in a preschool classroom or if you're in a high school classroom. But the way that they're implemented, obviously, is going to look a little bit different. When we think about early childhood classrooms with opportunities to respond, we should be thinking about puppets and song and lots of movement and visuals. Time for young children to talk about what what these things look like in their world. So on the screen, the slide should look familiar. These are the 5 early childhood practices in the classroom that can help improve behavior. We've talked about them in the first 2 meetings. Today, when we're thinking about adjusting task difficulty and we're thinking about opportunities to respond, we're really focused on that teaching of expectations and social skills. And just a reminder that the link, there's a link to a folder in Google where you can find an early childhood assessment, a nice infographic, and then a checklist of different strategies specific to early childhood classrooms.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yep.
So the 2 that we're going to focus on, one of them is going to be opportunities to respond. And really, this is a strategy that it's about less teacher talk time and more student talk time or response time. You know, I think there's a quote that says something about those that do the talking or those that do the doing, do the learning. And so that's really what this one is about. So this is really about all of the things that teachers do in their classrooms that allow children to respond. That could be nonverbals like thumbs up or using whiteboards or technology even to those verbal strategies where kids are responding. It's really important that that's happening a lot because it does increase engagement. And if students are engaged, we all know that there will be less behaviors happening if students are engaged in the lesson. So one of the tools that we want to share with you today will be about the opportunities to respond strategy. And it really talks about the verbal and the nonverbals that should be happening in the classroom. The other strategy people wanted to know more about, and this one is, the ones that we're talking about today are to me less behavioral and almost more academically related, is the adjusting task difficulty. And with this one, it's really about students showing what they know, maybe in non-traditional ways or ways that teachers are used to getting kids to show what they know. So is there a way to shorten the assignment, for example, and allow the students to demonstrate what they know and still get the gist of what they know without giving maybe a ton of extra problems? That's one way that you could adjust task difficulty. Highlighting, breaking the assignment into shorter chunks is another way that you can adjust kids showing what they know. Having shorter work periods and periods in between so students can kind of take a break or rest. Having students cover all the items except one that he's working on at that time is another idea. Other alternatives and creating breaks in between tasks are all different ways to do that. If students have struggles writing, are there other ways that they can orally show what they know? If students like to write, are there ways that you can use that as a way to have them show what they know? So it's really about allowing students to show their mastery of the content, but maybe it's not always has to be in writing. It's something that they can show in a different way. So it's a good strategy because, of course, if we know, especially for kids, in my experience as a teacher, when kids really struggled to write, behaviors did happen at that time because they were frustrated. So really thinking about other ways that you can do this. So our plan this morning really was to have you guys go in breakout rooms. You'll probably be happy to know that we're not going to do that because we're having trouble with the technology. So what's linked on this page are the actual teacher tools. This one is for the opportunities to respond. This one is for the adjusting task difficulty. That's hard for me to say this morning. But if I click on it, and you guys should still see it, you'll see the tool. It is from Missouri PBIS. Ohio steals a lot of our stuff from them. But I love these teacher tools because they are very explicit about what the strategy looks like. So if you look at this particular teacher tool for opportunities to respond, it tells you about what the practice is. It gives you an opportunity to do a self-assessment of what that strategy is. The teacher does that himself or herself. And then the second page is always a practice profile. So it's almost like a rubric of what that practice should look like. So we've included both of these for both practices that people identified that they wanted to learn more about. And what we were going to originally do is kind of break you guys into breakout rooms to kind of talk about how you use them or how could you use them. But since we're having difficulty with the breakout rooms, I'm just going to kind of throw it out there. I know some of you guys are using these. And if somebody would like to unmute and kind of talk about that, or if there's an interesting way that you think you might be able to use them in your schools, I would love to hear that, and it might give a nice idea to somebody else. Anybody you currently using these? And I don't want to call Erica out, but I know she does attach these strategies to her district agenda when they do district PBIS. So I called you out, Erica, sorry.
I kind of thought that might be coming. So we currently are just using these at the district level. We share these with our team leaders so that they can share them in a staff meeting. I had a great recommendation that I stole from someone else to just incorporate 5 minutes of PBIS updates within staff meetings. So I try at our district level meetings to give principals something they can take back that's easy to use, a quick video, and often this teacher tool for the classroom practices. So we're trying to align with what you're doing and share out those classroom practices as we're rolling out tier 1 with PBIS, just little bits at a time.
Thanks, Erica. I think that's a great use of these tools. It shouldn't be that you need tons of time to talk about them. I've seen PBIS teams look at these, choose one, and then decide what to share, and then kind of talk about it in meetings or like TBTs. Erica just shared that they're doing it at the district level as more like an instructional support for principals to share with teachers. Any other thoughts about if you're using these or how you could use these in your own specific settings to really enhance that classroom practice? Any other thoughts?
So hi, this is Darla.
Hi, Darla.
As a school counselor, when I go in and do lessons and ask questions, to engage the students, and people want to raise their hand right away, usually I will say, we're going to do some thinking time first before we do talking time. So I ask everybody to take, and I'll look at the clock and I'll say however many seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. The idea being that, obviously, I want to engage everybody, and the students who are quick on the draw are engaged. But those ones that need some processing time, if I don't set that standard, then I think they will disengage because they'll realize I'm never going to be fast enough to get that answer in. So, so if I start out by saying this is what the expectation is, we all take thinking time first, then I think it draws them in more.
Love that, because we do know, we knew those kids, those are like the ooh kids, like ooh, call me, right? And and they're engaged because they want to answer. So I think that's great. I think think time or processing time is really important, especially now in our age of immediate response and immediate stimulation. I think that's really an important skill to teach. Any other thoughts about how you guys use strategies like this, or how it might be used? And as we're thinking about that, I'm going to switch to the other teacher tool, which is adjusting task difficulty. I'm having trouble saying that this morning. Adjusting task difficulty. It's a lot of S's and K's. Other thoughts about, or maybe do you guys work with teachers, or do you as a teacher yourself have a good way to have kids show what they know, maybe not typically in a writing assignment or in a traditional way? I know this is a tougher one because when we start with these classroom practices, they're very, very PBIS related. And then I think as you go down the list of 8, they become a little bit more academically focused or classroom instruction focused. And I think sometimes we don't really maybe consider that to be part of the PBIS process, but it really is. You guys know, being in this business long enough, that when kids are not engaged, or if they're not interested in the content, you're going to have issues with behavior. So these are great teacher tools. Like I say, I love them. And I think any way that they can be introduced into your PBIS team or into classrooms, I think it's great, because even though this is not rocket science and it's really about good teaching, it is sometimes something that we forget when we get in the kind of the monotony of our daily teaching. We want to get the content, we want to do all that, but I think sometimes sometimes we don't pay as much attention and focus enough on some of these things. And it's really good to come back to that. So I think these are really, really great. They're really great strategies. They're really great tools to use. So we would encourage you guys to go ahead and use all the 8 that we've shared. Also the early childhood checklist that Michelle shared, look at those in your PBIS teams. Take a look at, how you can implement those into your classrooms. They're really great stuff. Missouri's got great stuff. There's a lot of states around that have a lot of great tools. And these are some of my favorites. And I know some of my colleagues also feel the same way.
Heidi, I was just going to share an example. You had said about, our kids given a different way to share what they know. And my son is in high school and they had a project to do, and they were given the option of how they wanted to present their information. They could either write a traditional paper, they could put together a Google slide presentation, they could do a drawing, and he loved it because he chose the slide presentation. He's very creative. And so for him, he probably put more time into that presentation than he would have had he been asked to write the paper, right. But he still was able to share what he knew. And it made me start reflecting too. And I remember all the way down into first grade, him starting to learn how to use Google Slides and present information in that manner. So again, thinking, how can we tap into not only, different formats, but also that technology component that kids are so good at now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Any other thoughts? And can one of you guys reshare the bit.ly link too while we're doing that? I'd appreciate it.
So I just wanted to say that as a previous intervention specialist, they are such a good resource for this adjusting the task difficulty. I mean, I'm looking at some of the things like the chunking the assignments and offering different options of how to present, whether it's written or oral. One time I had a student who drew a mural, on a piece of paper, but to represent something, a time span rather than writing it out. There are just so many options, and they're just a good resource.
Absolutely. Yep. They are the experts in all of those great strategies, and to tap into that is a great thing to do in your building for sure. And for those of you that are interested in UDL or are studying UDL or using UDL, I mean, this is very UDL like. You want to give kids, all the engagement, representation, and all of those things that we talk about. That's within this strategy. So it's all really very much tied together. So thank you. And I apologize for the technology issues. Some of you are probably glad you didn't have to go into a breakout room. Sometimes I feel like that, I'll be honest with you. But I'm glad we had a little bit of a discussion about it, because I think, again, I can't say this enough. If PBIS is not occurring in the classroom, you really cannot say that you were doing tier 1 with fidelity. So I'm going to keep harping on it until probably the day I die. I feel like sometimes, but I'm going to really keep revisiting it, because the school-wide is great. The non-classroom is great, but if it's not happening in the classroom, it's really, we can't say that we're really implementing with fidelity. So the next part of our presentation this morning is going to be from Cloverleaf Middle School. Dominic Wilson is here with his team, and he's going to share with you guys some of the things that they've been looking at as far as tier 2 is concerned, and kind of their process. So Dominic, you let me know. I know you have a couple slides, and you just let me know what slide you want to be on, and I'm happy to I'll be happy to navigate for you, but maybe you go ahead and introduce yourself to us, your team, and let us know kind of about your middle school a little bit, and then we can jump into the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. So I tried to get my team to be a part of this, and just like anything you do in a school setting, everyone is pulled in a million directions. So I've got one member of my team with me, and she's going to leave in about 2 minutes. Maggie?
I'm Maggie Oth. I'm an intervention specialist. I'm a co-teacher, but what's unique about my role on tier 2 is I'm like the liaison between what we call in the trenches here, the teachers that work with the students every day, and our tier 2 team. So I'm the one teacher that kind of sees both sides of it, the tier 2 and, the day-to-day routine of a classroom and the behaviors in a classroom. So.
So I guess to look at Cloverleaf Middle School in the macro sense, we do teaming. So we have 2 teams per grade level, or grade levels 6 through 8. Each team is interdisciplinary. So we've got 1 teacher from each of the 4 core subjects and an intervention specialist, depending on needs of the students. And then we normally have, we have a gifted specialist who works with 2 teams right now, and we'll probably work with 4 next year. We started out with PBIS, I want to say 4 years ago. We had a team of 8 people go to the ESC and get trained on tier 1. So we built that about 2 years into it. The assistant principal at the time came up to me. I was a teacher here previous to now being the AP. She came up to me and said, "Hey, you're going to lead PBIS." So I was kind of voluntold that this was going to be my baby. And so from there, we implemented tier 1. We reached the bronze level certification from the state. And then last year, we took the big dive, went into full-blown tier 2, and got the silver award. So it's been a lot of fun and a lot of work. So I guess if you would go to the next slide for me, please.
Okay.
The initial implementation part of this. So Frank had asked me a series of questions. He said, "I've got 4 things I really want you to talk about." The first was this initial implementation piece. And so there are things that we did that I loved, and there are things that I would definitely do differently if I was able to go back. So the way that we had initially started was we attended a lot of virtual trainings with Stephanie and Heidi. And it was only myself, the school psych, and our AP at the time. Going back, thinking about that again, I would much rather have had more teachers be involved in that training, because what ended up happening was we built our team, picking our experts, our behavior specialists for the school, an intervention specialist, our school psychs, our counselors, and our admin. At that point, I was the only one who had been trained because our AP went to a new position in a different building. So I had to be the expert in this, and I would have gone back and trained other people. So we kind of followed a train the trainer approach to that. We got the tier 2 handbooks, and we all kind of went through them and started looking at the processes that we had in place in tier 1 and how could they transition into those targeted groups of kids with similar behavior patterns. There was a lot of material creation, everything from the check-in, check-out forms to how do we structure groups. How are we going to take data from the check-in, check-out papers, which I've got a couple of links in here to kind of show you guys how we do that. But how do we take all that student data and do something meaningful with it, and really create interventions that are going to change kids' behaviors? There was a ton of meetings. There were meetings about meetings. There were ones after school that were an extra hour because we thought we were going to get through some things and we didn't. So it can be really intimidating at first if you're thinking about implementing tier 2, next year or starting to work on it this year. It can be really intimidating, but you have to just jump in. If you kind of tiptoe around it, you're never going to hit your stride. And if anybody has a question, please stop me. I'm very informal about that. Just holler.
And the chat is open also. You can type in there. And Dominic, if I remember correctly, the reason why we did the training that way, one of the reasons was it was COVID, right? So we weren't meeting in person. And so I would say as a trainer, I don't like to do tier 2 that way, even to train it that way, because I would rather have teams here and have them with their whole team working on their process. So I'll just throw that in there too. It was a bad time. And I know you guys wanted to get started. So it was really kind of a bad setup to begin with.
It was an adventure for sure. So one of the next pieces was the data decision rules. So I believe I shared these links so anyone can open them. If not, like I said, please holler at me. But the eligibility criteria is one of the first things that we really looked at. And so this determines how we get a kid who is obviously part of tier 1, the whole building. But how do we get them to kind of enroll in tier 2? How do we know whether or not to provide those targeted interventions? And so we went through and looked at the ODRs, the office discipline referrals, which we only looked at majors in that regard, because we use Swiss to kind of capture all of our discipline. And then the classroom minors, truancy, which never has really played a part in our tier 2, because we do the AIT meetings and things like that. We talk about attendance in a different light. It doesn't really factor as much into our tier 2, but that's just the way that we do it. It could be different based on your school and your needs. And then we did teacher nominations, which I'll walk you through some of the things that we've really changed about this. When we looked at the majors and minors, we stopped looking at just the number and we started looking at what's the function of the behavior. If we have a kid, let's say right now I've got some 7th graders who have 1 referral for being tardy, 1 for being defiant, 1 for being disrespectful, 1 for physical aggression, and then they've got 1 for a tech violation. There's no pattern that we can go off of. This kid's kind of just being a knucklehead. So we start to look at this and go, well, that's not a kid that necessarily we're going to bring in right now because we don't have an established behavior pattern. We're going to push that back on the teachers to work with that kid and figure out, is it a classroom engagement problem? Is it something different? Because it's kind of out of our hands. But when we see that consistency of disruption or consistency of defiance, that's when we really start to pull these kids in. Now, the student identification flow chart walks us through how we would do things, what our processes are. And so once we look at that referral process, we get the kid in, we determine they're absolutely going to be part of our tier 2. Then we're going to collect some data from the team of teachers. We're going to ask them, hey, what are some things that you see explicitly in your classroom? How are they defiant? How are they disrespectful? And what is it that they're seeking? So then we give the motivation assessment scale to try to figure out what the kid's currency is. Once we can determine that, we can start to explore the check-in, check-out paperwork. So our check-in, check-out has 3 goals at the top. They follow our matrix language: responsible, respectful, and safe. We will typically pick 1 statement from our matrix that fits the needs of that child to go within the responsible, within the respectful, and the safe. So that way we have targeted data about that kid's behavior. Okay, any questions right now? This is a lot.
Sorry, again, chat's open also. You can pop stuff in there.
All right.
If you don't want to interrupt, that's fine.
Okay, so for the data collection and use, I cleaned up our spreadsheets and made some mock data. But if you look at the parking lot, newbies, and in the game, those are our friendly terms for kids that we're watching, kids that are just about to be in, and kids who are currently in our program. So that first tab where it says newbies, this is the kind of data that we're looking at, is the majors, the minors, and the notes. Very, very basic stuff. This is all just ripped out of Swiss. And then if we have to contact the team, we contact the team if we have a question about specific information. Now, in the parking lot, we start to take the information that we had in the beginning and expand into some of those meetings. So now we're meeting with the team. We're starting to go, okay, we're seeing a trend. What have you guys done? What have you implemented? And how has it been either successful or not successful? Because we don't want to do the same thing that a teacher's already done that's been unsuccessful. That wouldn't make any sense. And then we go to our in the game kids. So we determine that they are absolutely going to be in tier 2. And this is where I can't praise my team enough. They are absolutely brilliant when it comes to the data pieces, the collection, the analysis, all of this. We get our parent sign off. We start check in, check out. We do the mass. We pull the mass data so it's shared amongst the whole team. It's shared out to our team of teachers so they know what the kid's currency is. The kids pick a mentor. So we give them 3 choices of anybody in the building. And then we try to give them their first pick. Sometimes, your best teachers are going to have 85 kids who want them to be their mentor, and that's not reasonable. So we try to limit it to no more than 3 kids, just because that checkout process at the end of the day can sometimes take more than a minute. And then we continue to monitor their Swiss data. So if they're still having referrals, we might not know because we might not be their teacher or on their team, but we need to know what this kid's behavior is looking like. So that's kind of how we use data there. And then the next link on there, this is one kid's data. So every day their check-in, check-out form is turned into the mentor. At the end of the week, our tier 2 team goes around and collects the folders for each kid who's in the program. And then we input the data into this spreadsheet. So we're looking for that positive trend data. We're looking for that line to go up because that means that what we're doing is successful. What's really nice about this is that we can go back and say, hey, why did that kid dip right there? What happened from November 10th to November 16th, let's say, if they had a low trend right there? Sometimes it's a teacher was out and there was a substitute. And we need to talk to that kid about how to behave for a substitute. Other times it's a home situation. There's some kind of trauma that happened during that time. And so we can really start to look at the whole kid. And that's our approach to this really is understanding the whole kid. And I'm looking at the chat right now. Where did we get the mass? I can share it actually. Let me pull it up. My behavior specialist gave it to me. She teaches our emotionally disturbed kids. So she has access to every assessment ever. But I can put that into the chat. And we actually made it, let me see. We made it into a Google form. So I'm pulling that up right now. And I will drop that in.
There are different forms of that. Some of them have more questions. Some of them it's a briefer form. So you can even just Google motivation assessment scale and find it. But if Dominic put it in a Google form, that's pretty good because usually what you see is a paper copy on, if you Google it. So that's pretty good. That's pretty cool.
We just found it to be, I guess, easier for the teachers because the goal is not to create more work, even though sometimes it feels like that.
Yep.
So let me pull that up.
That is one of the tenets of tier 2. It has to be minimal work on the teachers. Doing the interventions it has to be minimal work on the teacher's behalf. So that's a good point.
All right. There's that. Okay. So then
ready to go on to?
Yeah.
Okay.
So here were some of our biggest obstacles. Education is littered with acronyms that most people don't know what they stand for because there's just too many. So we created a PBIS handbook for our entire staff. It's extremely long because we wanted to be as detailed as possible. I think it's 38 pages, something like that. But right at the beginning, we made a glossary, and I don't want to take credit for that. That was Maggie actually, who sat down and decided we were going to make a glossary. But that helped everybody get on the same page, and it seemed like a really simple thing to do. But then we realized that we start talking about ODRs, and we started talking about the BIPs, behavior improvement plans. We start talking about like all of these different things are common language for us when we meet in this one room, but all our teachers aren't aware of all this. So that was something that we had to kind of overcome. Student refusal. This one was an obstacle every day for certain kids, and I don't know that it will ever end. We've had kids, because right now it's on paper, they just have to carry around one blue piece of paper. We've had kids put it on clipboards. We've scanned it and made QR codes and taped it to their Chromebooks. We've had teachers be the ones to carry it. We've tried a million different things because most of the time the kids who are your behavior concerns are doing it because they want the peer approval. They want the sense of being cool, being that bad kid. They don't want to carry around a behavior plan. So sometimes you do have to be a little bit creative with that and incentivize it. We talk all the time about we have to teach kids behaviors just like we teach kids how to read or write. So if a kid's not used to carrying around a behavior plan, taking it to a teacher at the beginning of class, taking it at the end of class, all of those pieces, they're not going to do it inherently. They're not just going to pick it up one day and be consistent about it. So we spend those first 2 weeks teaching them, when you walk into class, give them your blue paper. When you leave class, go get that blue paper. And then the teachers have to help. They can't just say, well, the kid's going to take care of it, because it's a learning process for the kid as well. As far as mentoring goes, so we had some significant inconsistencies at first, because everybody has a different perception of what it means to mentor someone. So we made another slideshow and did a presentation and shared it out to all of our mentors. And that's linked in there for you guys as well. But it goes through, how do you mentor a kid who's on tier 2? What do you do if they don't want to do it? You know, how can you incentivize it without spending money? Things like that that are frequently asked, but typically not asked to team members. They're asked in the staff lounge. And then the last one, which we didn't think was going to be a problem, but it turned out to be a huge one, is our attendance at meetings. So now that I've transitioned from teacher to admin, you guys know there's too many meetings in a day. So holding that meeting, we were holding it on Tuesdays, that turned out to be an IEP day. There's a 504 day in the week. There's admin meetings. There's all these things that were happening at the same time. And part of the TFI is your attendance at meetings. So we had to look at everyone's calendars and really be intentional about creating that time that we're untouchable. So that's what I have.
And, you know, I wanted to add to that, Dominic, that when you talk about your mentor training, a lot of times when we've been going through the TFI and tier 2, people are asking, what does checking the fidelity of the implementation or the fidelity of the intervention really look like with the particular intervention? That's one way to address that. We want to make sure that those interventions are being done the same way. That's what makes it standardized for every adult that's doing them is doing it the same way. Every kid receives it the same way. So that is a great way to approach that, to really make sure. And you notice there were inconsistencies. So then you can't say, oh, the intervention's not working. Well, you can't really say that unless everybody's doing it the same way. So I just love that idea of that mentor training. I think that's a fabulous idea.
Thank you.
So I'm going to open it up to questions. I know a couple, there was one in the chat. Is there any questions, comments for Dominic about the tier 2 processes that they've put in place at Cloverleaf Middle School?
I try to link in as much as I
questions?
could. I mean, obviously, feel free to steal anything we've got.
Dominic, if people have questions after today, can they, would it be okay if they contacted you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put my email into the chat real quick.
Okay. And Dennis did have a question for you in the chat about copies of the resources.
All right, hang on just a second. All right. A copy of
other questions.
I will get onto that Google form and send it.
We'll go ahead and move on. Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's fine. Hi, my name is Doug Haas. I'm at Copley High School. I just was curious if you've developed any type of alignment, because this is really good. Like, have you developed any type of alignment to develop up to the high school? Because I know, you know, I guess maybe has your high school reached out to you to develop alignment in terms of, you know, taking this to the high school level, you know, from the middle school? Thanks.
Yeah.
Great job.
Awesome. Yeah. So our high school right now is in the infancy of PBIS as an overall. They have asked me for some of the resources that we did for tier 1. How did we get started? How do we get staff buy-in? Things like that, because the incentive system is going to look different. You know, my kids in this building are about 11 to 14. The incentive for an 11-year-old is very different than the incentive for an 18-year-old. And then where do those funds come from and what budget line and all of those nuances that you don't see when the finished product is in front of you. I've been sharing folders out with them about materials. I would be more than happy to share out a copy of our handbook because that has a lot of our information in it with everybody here if you'd want something like that.
Absolutely. I'll take it. We're in the same boat. We're in the infancy as well. So I'll, it's called collaboration, not stealing. So that's the way I look at it.
That's right. Don't
Yeah,
reinvent
absolutely.
the wheel if you don't have to. That's right. We say that all the time in PBIS work for sure. Dominic did provide his email address in the chat if anybody wants to follow up question. And just as a reminder, we are going to stay on after 10 o'clock for anybody that wants to talk specifically tier 2 and do any kind of problem solving or ask each other questions or any of that. And we're going to do that after this first hour is over.
Heidi, there is a question. Are your mentors volunteers or are all teachers expected to be a mentor?
Thanks, Stacy.
Oh, so in our building, we sent out a Google form at the beginning of the year, and we asked them if they would like to be a mentor. And then we briefly give a description of what a mentor is. We kind of try to clear up some of the confusion that you need to go to the store and buy 35 candy bars every weekend. Things like that, because sometimes that's the perception. So it is not mandatory. It's completely voluntary. I've had a few kids who will not pick any adults who are on the list. That's where we kind of get into a gray area. I've tried to take on some of our hardest kids, some of the most significant behavior kids, but it's also difficult, I think, from an admin position to take on those kids because I'm also suspending them. So having that working relationship back and forth is difficult. There have been times I've gone up to people who have not volunteered for a position as a mentor, and I said, hey, this kid really likes you. You did a great job building that relationship. You know, they look up to you. They want to talk to you about their day. They want all these things. Most of the time that teacher is so flattered that they've made that relationship with that kid and that kid likes them that much that they'll say, I absolutely would be that kid's mentor. I just don't want to be that other kid's mentor. So that's kind of how we assign those.
Dominic, do you utilize non-teaching staff like custodians, secretaries? I know sometimes kids have or like people who are in those classified positions, and they can be used as mentors too, for sure, if they have a good relationship with the child.
Yeah, so we use our parapros in the same way. Our paraprofessionals, they can be mentors. I have not utilized our secretaries, and I've talked with our custodians about it. But I'm not sure that they feel as comfortable mentoring some of our kids as our parapros and teachers. I think it would be hugely beneficial for a lot of our kids, but I don't know that we're at that point yet.
Okay. I think it's a great goal. It's a great goal.
How much time is spent in the mentor role? And if I miss a question, I apologize. Please holler at me. How much time is spent in the mentor role? So we're looking at 2 minutes in the morning, 2 minutes in the afternoon. That's it. As a mentor last year, I think I had three or four last year kids. And they come in, you talk about, hey, what was for dinner last night? Did you watch the game? Did you, what did you have for breakfast? Things like that. Try to get them talking about non-academic things. Then you say, what class do you want to do really well in today? What do you have coming up? Do you have a test? Do you have whatever? And you try to keep that conversation at 2 minutes, give them a pat on the back and say, you got this, I believe in you, and let them roll out. At the end of the day, hey, looking at your data on here, you did great in ELA and social studies. Looks like math, you had a hard time. What's going on in math, man? Is it another kid? Is it the teacher? Was the work just really boring? What's going on? And then you kind of talk that through, again, another 2 minutes, and then you send them home.
The thing about check in, check out or mentoring, that's going to be really effective for those kiddos that find adult attention reinforcing. I was thinking when you were saying there are a couple kids that are resisting or, you're having difficulty with. So I would think, really looking at what that function of behavior is, because maybe putting them on a check and check out or a mentoring might not be appropriate right away, or maybe ever, maybe choosing some other kind of tier 2 intervention, because we always, the research indicates that for 60 to 75% of kids identified for tier 2, check and check out is going to work, but that leaves out a lot of kids. So, what other kind of things can we do? And knowing their function of behavior, what kind of interventions can we put in place? But I think for those kids that find that adult attention reinforcing, it's a fabulous and very studied and empirically founded intervention. So it's really, really very good.
Yeah, and you brought up something great that I forgot to add during the kind of presentation part of this, is that we do our social academic instructional groups as well, which the way that those work is we decide, does a kid need check-in, check-out? Do they need groups, or do they need both? Sometimes those kids need groups, but the group's not going to fit them. So then we have to look for other opportunities for kids of similar behavior patterns to make a group.
Yeah.
But in those groups, we're talking about those self-regulation pieces. We're talking about study skills. We're talking about whatever it is that that group of kids needs according to their behaviors. So that's been really useful as well.
Yeah. And typically in school age, we talk about the check and check out and then those groups. And then there's other interventions too, but those are kind of like the two main ones that we train. Yeah. Awesome. Well, we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to continue. Dominic, were you planning on staying on after 10 o'clock or do you have to go?
I can. I'm not sure for how long, but I would be happy
Okay.
to.
I'm going to go ahead and give you guys updates, which I know a lot of people are here for. We will stay on after 10 for tier 2 conversation. And if there's maybe more questions, folks can ask Dominic at that time. And he's also provided his email in the chat box if you want to email him for further information. Thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation and a great way of using tier 2 at the middle school level, which sometimes is tough. I was a middle school educator for a long time. It's with the amount of kids you have and all the logistical considerations, it's tough to implement tier 2 there. And in high school too, it's a little tough. It's tough to implement tier 2.
Well, thank you. I mean, we couldn't have done it without your guys' help in the whole training process and getting us
you
ready.
guys are doing the work. So thank you so much.
So, thanks.
Yeah. And thank you for being willing to share with the region. We really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So as we finish up, you guys, I know we have about 4 minutes left. Updates. A lot of you asked me, where can we get grant money to do PBIS? Well, apparently in 2023, and I don't think it's been released yet, but Stronger Connections is a grant that's going to be available and it can be used to enhance your school environment. I'm imagining that that's going to include PBIS type things. So for those of you that sometimes ask me about grants, that is one that's coming early 2023. There's a story on ODE. You can look at it. I'm not sure at this point if it's been released. When we created the slides, it still wasn't out yet. So there's a grant opportunity there. For those of you that are looking for a social emotional curriculum, Harmony, which is from Castle, has released their 3rd edition. It is free. It is a social emotional curriculum that is aligned to the standards, the social emotional standards, and they have just updated it. All you have to do is sign in with an account and you can get all of their stuff for free. And it's for those schools that maybe don't want to invest in a curriculum that you have to pay for. That's a great one. It only goes to grade 6, I believe. It's K6. So if you're a high school or a middle school, you may need to look elsewhere, but it's been released and it's fabulous and all tied to the social emotional standards. So there's a link there. And then for those of you who are thinking about recognition for this year, it is, most of you already know it's completely changing. And I won't go into I won't get on my soapbox and go into an op-ed about it, but right now what I do know is that tentatively, I think this is pretty much for sure, you should be receiving an Ed Connect with information about the recognition process. What I can tell you at this point, it looks like, and anything can change, but it looks like the application will be released through this Ed Connect on February 1st. On that application will be an intent to apply link. If you would like to apply this year, you must complete the information in that link by February 22nd. I will tell you, if that is not done by February 22nd, I think they're giving till midnight. If you don't get your intent to apply in, you cannot apply for recognition this year. The reason why the deadlines are so hard is because We are not reviewing our own schools this year. You will be reviewed by a different SST, and to set up all of that, it's going to take a lot. So the deadlines are going to be very hard. There's not going to be any flexibility there. The application and evidence upload will be by May 1st. And if everything is not in, and I know I've been guilty of this and some of my colleagues too, we would prompt for evidence. If everything is not in there, you will not get a prompt for evidence. What is in the folder by May 1st for that upload, that's going to be what's going to be reviewed for recognition. Everything should be pretty clear in the Ed Connect that's coming out. I will tell you 2 new things that are going to be required this year that I did not put on the slide. Number 1, the self-assessment survey will be required. If you don't know what that is, or you don't know how to administer that, please reach out to an SST consultant to find that out. The second thing that will be required this year will be in school, out of school, and suspension data. And that's going to be required to be reported along with your SAS scores, and of course your TFI scores is always required. But in the fall, they will be pulling EMIS data when the EMIS data is available, as we score schools, they're going to be giving us that EMIS data so that it will help us with the way that we score the applications. It's a whole complicated process I don't want to get into now, but I do want to remind you that that is going to be something that they're going to be looking at, is the EMIS data for that data outcome data. And that's going to be required this year. Dominic said, do we maintain our silver status? Technically, no. It is, you have to reapply every year. The reason for that is, I think, to make sure people are continuing to do the framework. You know, you can go somewhere and say, oh, I was gold in 2011, and maybe I'm not gold anymore. So to keep that, that award is for that year, that school year. So yes, you do have to reapply. And so if there are questions about that, we're happy to talk to you guys about it. But I do know that there are going to be some different requirements this year. Just wanted to remind you, the next high school think tank is tomorrow. People who have attended those have really liked them. That is the link. All you have to do is show up. You don't have to register. And then they really talk about high school issues. So for Doug, I know, who is on the call, that might be something that you might want to, if you have time to log into. It's only an hour, and it's high schools from across the country that get together and problem solve their PBIS frameworks. People have really had great things to say about that. I'm not going to go into this because we're already over time, but we just want to remind you guys that research, and what I found out at the National Forum when I went in October, is that the research is really clear. If there is not an active administrator on your team who is supporting your effort, it's not going to go very far. So if you would like to dig into that data, I will leave that for you. But it is, as Dominic is an administrator himself probably can attest, if you do not have an active administrator on your team, the framework is not going to go as far as you want it to go. So it's really important, if you guys are administrators on this call, you have to be participatory in the process. And then there are a couple of new resources on this last page here. That CMOT, that first one, if you guys like those teacher tools that we've been sharing with you, this is kind of a one-stop shop with kind of all of those considerations on a one-pager. So I love the teacher tools from Missouri, but I discovered that also with the PBIS forum in October. It is a great one-pager if you want it like look-fors in your classrooms. It's great. Great Mindshift podcast about classroom management. And the 3 after that are ones that we've shared with you guys in the past. So